In 1940, Hitler's blitzkrieg swept across Europe, with most countries rapidly surrendering to the relentless onslaught of the German military. Even France was not spared. However, after France capitulated, Hitler was unable to smoothly conquer Britain as he had hoped. The reason behind this was that, although Britain had lost its allies on the European continent and appeared isolated, seemingly an easy target for the Germans, the situation was far more complex than it seemed. Not only did Britain refuse to surrender, but in the months that followed, it put up a fierce resistance. The British Royal Navy and its powerful air force became an insurmountable barrier for Nazi Germany. To conquer Britain, Hitler devised an invasion plan codenamed Operation Sea Lion. The plan called for first gaining air superiority, followed by a large-scale invasion to seize Britain. However, due to Germany's failure in the Battle of Britain and naval warfare, Hitler was forced to abandon his plan to conquer Britain. This video will explore the reasons behind the failure of Operation Sea Lion and its impact on the course of World War II. In June 1940, France quickly collapsed and surrendered to the German blitzkrieg, marking a decisive victory for Nazi Germany on the European front. The fall of France convinced Hitler that Germany was just one step away from fully conquering Europe, with Britain as the last obstacle standing in his way. However, Britain was not as easy to conquer as France. Despite suffering defeats on the European battlefield, Britain refused to surrender. After Winston Churchill came to power, the British government and people displayed unprecedented resolve, refusing to be swayed by the collapse of the continent. Britain's isolated geographical position as an island nation and its powerful Royal Navy made it an obstacle that Hitler could not easily overcome. At this point, Hitler realized that only through direct military action could Britain be forced into submission. Thus, Operation Sea Lion was born. Hitler hoped to quickly conquer Britain through a cross-channel invasion. The core of the plan was to first destroy Britain's air force through intense aerial bombardment to gain air superiority, then send large ground forces via sea to launch a full-scale invasion. On July 16, 1940, Hitler issued Führer Order No. 16, announcing the grand goal of Operation Sea Lion to the entire military. The problem, however, was that although Germany's army was dominant on the European battlefield, its navy was far inferior to Britain's. The size, tonnage, and strength of the German navy could not compare to that of the British Royal Navy. As an island nation, Britain's geographical position, surrounded by the sea and separated from the European continent by the English Channel, provided it with a natural defense. Unlike continental powers like France, Germany, and Russia, Britain did not have to worry about land borders with neighboring countries. As long as it maintained control over the seas, foreign enemies found it difficult to pose a direct threat to Britain's mainland. Thus, Britain's strong navy had always been the foundation of its national defense. Moreover, Britain's prosperity and global influence were closely tied to the sea. Historically, Britain established its colonial dominance through numerous naval victories. In the 16th century, the British Navy defeated Spain's mighty Armada, making Britain a maritime power and facilitating its overseas expansion. By the 17th century, Britain had engaged in several wars with the Netherlands over trade control and maritime supremacy, ultimately securing its dominance at sea. It was thanks to this powerful navy that Britain gradually established a global empire spanning the Americas, Africa, Asia, and Oceania, earning the title of the Empire on which the sun never set. Before World War II, the British Navy consistently aimed to outdo its competitors and maintain its position as the world's leading naval power. Therefore, by 1940, despite Germany's naval strength, the German Navy was still significantly weaker than the Royal Navy, especially in terms of battleships and aircraft carriers, where Germany lagged far behind. Even the German naval elite could not compete with the Royal Navy in terms of both quantity and quality. Unable to achieve naval supremacy, Hitler turned his attention to the Air Force. He hoped to first defeat the British Royal Air Force and then launch the invasion. Given the excellent performance of the German Luftwaffe in previous campaigns, especially during the Blitzkrieg in Poland and France, Hitler believed that if he could destroy Britain's air defenses, his forces could successfully land and defeat Britain. Therefore, the key to Operation Sea Lion was to secure air superiority. Air superiority would not only protect the German Navy and supply convoys, but also ensure that the amphibious forces could safely land on the British coast. To achieve this goal, Hitler planned a massive aerial assault to completely destroy the British Air Force, which led to the upcoming Battle of Britain. At the outset of the Battle of Britain, let's compare the air forces of Britain and Germany. Germany had more than 2,600 aircraft, including the Messerschmitt Bf 109 fighters, Heinkel bombers, and Junkers 88 bombers. Britain, on the other hand, had just over 1,200 aircraft, mainly relying on Spitfire and Hurricane fighters and Wellington bombers. Although Germany had more than twice the number of aircraft as Britain, this numerical advantage did not translate into actual combat superiority. This was primarily due to the long distances of operations and difficulties with fuel supply. Most of the Battle of Britain took place over British territory, far from German air bases. The primary German fighter, the Messerschmitt Bf 109, had an operational range of about 600 kilometers, which limited their time over British skies to just 15 to 20 minutes, severely impacting the effectiveness and efficiency of the German Air Force. Meanwhile, the British Air Force could engage in prolonged combat and defense without worrying about fuel shortages. Additionally, when German pilots were shot down, they could only crash on British soil and become prisoners of war, whereas British pilots had the chance to be rescued and return to the fight. Therefore, Germany's numerical advantage was negated by the limitations of long-range operations, and both air forces were roughly equal in strength. On July 10, 1940, the German Air Force launched its first airstrike against Britain, marking the beginning of the largest air battle of World War II. The Battle of Britain was divided into 4 phases, with the first phase lasting from July 10 to August 12, aiming primarily to weaken Britain's maritime supply lines and air defense systems in preparation for later, larger-scale attacks. Initially, the German Air Force targeted Britain's southern coastal shipping lanes, focusing on ports, ships, the Channel defense lines, and merchant convoys, with the goal of disrupting Britain's supply lines and economy. Additionally, the Luftwaffe attacked British radar stations, attempting to break down Britain's early warning systems. However, Britain's radar network was meticulously designed and well defended. During the Battle of Britain, Britain's advanced radar system became a crucial technological advantage. When German planes entered British airspace, they were quickly detected and British fighter planes were dispatched to intercept them, greatly enhancing operational efficiency. Thanks to an efficient command and control network, the British Air Force successfully resisted the German attacks. Although Britain's shipping suffered from disruptions, the overall strategic impact on the war was not decisive. During this phase, the German Air Force lost 367 planes, while the British Air Force lost 183, maintaining a 2-to-1 loss ratio, which was roughly in line with the proportions of the two countries' aircraft fleets. From August 13 to September 6, 1940, the second phase of the Battle of Britain began, marking the major offensive by the German Air Force. The Germans shifted their focus to destroying British air bases and aircraft factories, aiming to weaken the British Air Force by attacking ground facilities. Luftwaffe commander Hermann Göring assured Hitler that Britain's southern defenses would collapse within 4 days, and the British Air Force would be completely destroyed within 4 weeks. On August 13, 1940, the Luftwaffe launched Operation Eagle Day, marking the start of a massive aerial assault. Hundreds of German bombers and fighters carried out sustained attacks on multiple air bases and industrial facilities. The German Air Force used large formations and smaller groups to attack in waves, preventing the British defenses from mounting a concentrated counterattack. British commander Dowding remained calm under pressure, first ordering interceptors to engage the enemy aircraft attacking ground facilities, then sending as many fighters as possible to protect the aircraft manufacturing plants in the south. Over the next 10 days, Germany launched 5 major bombing raids on Britain, causing significant damage to British airfields, runways, and facilities, and many British aircraft were unable to take off. From August 24th to September 6th, as per Göring's directive, the German Air Force conducted extensive bombing raids on British aircraft factories in the south. During these 2 weeks, the Germans launched over 1,000 sorties per day, bombarding British targets in wave after wave. By this time, Britain's Air Force had suffered significant losses due to the Germans' numerical superiority. Since the start of the air battle, 231 British pilots had been killed, about a quarter of their total number, putting a heavy strain on the Royal Air Force. More critically, 6 of Britain's 7 command centers in the south were destroyed. If this trend had continued, the Royal Air Force would have soon lost its fighting capability. However, at this critical moment, Göring made a fatal mistake by ordering the bombing of London, which gave the exhausted British Air Force a valuable opportunity to recover. In September 1940, the Battle of Britain entered its third phase. The German Luftwaffe shifted its strategy, redirecting its focus from Air Force bases and aircraft factories to large cities and civilian infrastructure. This change of target was triggered by an accidental event. On the night of August 24th, 12 German planes, flying through thick fog, mistakenly dropped bombs over central London, causing numerous civilian casualties. In retaliation, the Royal Air Force, RAF, bombed Berlin for the first time on August 25th, and then carried out 2 more raids on Berlin on August 28th and 31st. Although these small-scale British airstrikes caused limited damage to Germany, they provoked Hitler's immense fury, and he vowed to make London pay the price for the attacks. As a result, the Luftwaffe decided to launch a large-scale bombing campaign against London. On September 7, 1940, a massive formation of 625 bombers, 648 fighters, and escort aircraft flew across the English Channel from various directions and altitudes, heading straight for London. The British expected the Germans to target Air Force bases, so they had stationed their planes at coastal bases and neglected air defense over London, leaving the city vulnerable. The German bombing raids went smoothly, and within an hour, more than 300 tons of high-explosive bombs and incendiary devices were dropped on London. The air raids continued until the early morning of the following day, with over 1,300 fires breaking out in the city. Many neighborhoods became infernos, and various industrial facilities, transportation hubs, power grids, and residential areas were destroyed. Even Buckingham Palace, the residence of the king, was bombed. During this raid, over 300 Londoners were killed and more than 1,500 were wounded. The next morning, the sun could barely penetrate the thick smoke hanging over the city. For the next 7 days, the Germans did not stop their attacks. Day and night, they carried out large-scale bombing raids, turning London into a sea of flames and causing immense casualties and property damage. The Germans intended to force Britain into surrender, but this only had the opposite effect. Rallying the British resolve to fight, Winston Churchill addressed the nation, firmly declaring, "We will never surrender." Once the Luftwaffe shifted its focus to London, the Air Force bases along the British coast were spared, giving the RAF a rare opportunity to regroup. Ground crews worked tirelessly to repair and maintain the downed aircraft, allowing the RAF to reorganize and regain its fighting strength. After 8 days of intense bombardment, the RAF situation had greatly improved. On September 15, 1940, the most intense battle of the Battle of Britain took place. The RAF sent out 19 squadrons, totaling over 300 aircraft, to intercept 800 German planes heading for London. The fierce air battle lasted all day, and despite the Germans' efforts, The RAF's staunch resistance forced the Luftwaffe to retreat in disarray. By the end of the day, 56 German planes were shot down, and 80 more returned with heavy damage. On the British side, 26 planes were downed, and 7 were written off due to severe damage. This day marked a turning point in the Battle of Britain. On September 16th and 17th, the RAF continued to strike at German troops massing along the coast in preparation for a landing, sinking and damaging nearly 100 ships, inflicting heavy losses on the Germans and forcing Hitler to order the cessation of ship gatherings along the coast. As the Luftwaffe faced heavy losses in daylight raids, the German High Command decided to scale back daytime operations and shift more bombing missions to nighttime raids to reduce casualties. Starting in October, the Battle of Britain entered its fourth phase, with the Germans relying on night bombing. The primary targets were London and industrial cities like Birmingham, Coventry, and Liverpool, as the Germans aimed to avoid direct confrontation with British fighters. At the same time, sporadic daylight raids continued, intended to disrupt British air defense operations and weaken their combat effectiveness. However, these efforts had limited success. The British night defense system gradually improved, significantly reducing the effectiveness of the German bombing. Additionally, Germany suffered heavy losses of aircraft and experienced pilots, further diminishing their advantage in air combat. By the end of October 1940, the Luftwaffe had suffered severe losses and could no longer sustain large-scale bombing operations. The largest air battle of World War II, the Battle of Britain, was effectively over. While Britain and Germany fought for control of the skies over the British Isles, they also engaged in intense naval battles. As an island nation, Britain's survival depended on its global colonial network, especially its vital supply lines with North America. The Atlantic shipping lanes, which accounted for 3/4 of global shipping at the time, were crucial to Britain's life-or-death struggle. These routes were essential for Britain to receive strategic materials, industrial raw materials, and food. If Germany could sever Britain's maritime lifelines in the Atlantic, it would cripple British industrial production and civilian life. On the other hand, if Britain could maintain control over the Atlantic, it could continue receiving crucial resources like weapons, fuel, and food from the United States and Canada, allowing it to keep fighting Germany. Therefore, the Battle of the Atlantic was equally critical for Britain's survival in the war. In response to the naval threat, Germany realized that its navy's tonnage and number of warships were far inferior to the Royal Navy's, and that direct confrontation would be difficult to win. Therefore, the German Navy adopted a strategy of submarine warfare. During World War I, Germany's U-boats had severely disrupted the Allied shipping, and by World War II, Germany once again relied on U-boats as their primary naval strike force. These submarines operated covertly, capable of patrolling underwater for long periods and launching surprise attacks on unescorted merchant vessels. In the early years of World War II, Germany's U-boats were limited in number and typically operated alone, so they didn't achieve the desired effect. To increase the effectiveness of submarine warfare, German Admiral Karl Donitz devised a new tactic called the Wolfpack strategy. The core of this tactic was to coordinate multiple U-boats via radio communication, concentrating their firepower to launch large-scale attacks on enemy convoys. Given that Britain's anti-submarine technology was still underdeveloped, especially in detecting submarines at night, the Germans exploited this advantage by often launching coordinated attacks at night. U-boats typically operated in small groups, patrolling the Atlantic, and when they spotted an enemy convoy, they would communicate via radio to assemble into a wolf pack and launch a simultaneous torpedo attack on British ships. The Wolfpack strategy proved highly effective in the early years of the war, especially along the central and northern Atlantic shipping lanes, where German U-boats concentrated their attacks. Britain suffered major losses in this area, with merchant ships sinking at an alarming rate. In 1940 alone, The Allies lost more than 1,000 merchant ships, totaling over 4 million tons of cargo. This was a devastating blow to Britain, as its domestic production could not keep up with such enormous losses. In response to the U-boat threat, Britain quickly implemented a series of measures to reduce losses to merchant convoys. First, Britain established an escort system, organizing convoys of merchant ships protected by escort ships, including destroyers and corvettes, and equipped with depth charges to attack submarines. This significantly strengthened the defense of British convoys. Additionally, Britain made major advancements in radar and sonar technology. Radar allowed the British Navy to detect enemy activity earlier, while sonar was used to detect submarines underwater. With the widespread use of these technologies, the effectiveness of the Wolfpack strategy began to decline. Furthermore, Britain deployed large numbers of anti-submarine patrol aircraft along the Atlantic coast and at sea, equipped with depth charges and torpedoes specifically designed to hunt submarines. The addition of air power severely limited the range of the Wolfpack strategy, particularly in the northern and central Atlantic, where Allied air reconnaissance frequently reduced the threat posed by U-boats. The early stages of World War II saw the German Navy developing both its submarines and surface warships in tandem. While the U-boats inflicted significant damage on the British Navy, Germany's surface warships were also formidable, with the Bismarck battleship being the most menacing. The Bismarck was the largest battleship in the history of the German Navy, and it was named after Otto von Bismarck, the renowned German chancellor who unified the loosely connected German states into the powerful German Empire. Bismarck's legacy was highly regarded in Germany, and the battleship's name reflected the nation's high expectations for the ship. Construction of the Bismarck began on July 1, 1936, at the Hamburg shipyard in Germany, and it was officially commissioned on August 24, 1940. As a culmination of Germany's naval development, it featured cutting-edge technology and equipment. The ship was 250.5 meters long, 36 meters wide, and was powered by 12 high-pressure boilers and 3 turbine engines, producing 138,000 horsepower. With a maximum speed of 56 kilometers per hour and a range of 193,000 kilometers, the Bismarck could easily circumnavigate Britain. Fully loaded, the Bismarck displaced more than 50,000 tons and was equipped with 8 380mm main guns and 320mm thick-belt armor. This made it not only heavily armed, but also well protected, achieving top-tier performance in every category. The Bismarck was a source of immense pride for the Nazi German Navy, widely regarded as an invincible warship. Despite the Bismarck's tremendous power, Germany relied more on U-boat operations in the early years of the war, and as a result, the Bismarck did not immediately see combat. It wasn't until May 1941 that it participated in its only military engagement during the operation codenamed Rheinebom, marking the only battle it would ever fight. On May 18, 1941, the Bismarck and the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen departed from Norway, heading into the North Atlantic for a large-scale raid intended to disrupt Britain's Atlantic supply lines. However, their movements were detected by intelligence sources, and the British Navy was alerted. To counter this threat, the British sent out 2 of their most powerful ships, the Hood battlecruiser and the Prince of Wales battleship. On May 24th, the 2 fleets encountered each other in the Denmark Strait. In the opening exchange, the British misidentified the Prinz Eugen as the Hood due to the similar appearance of their paint schemes and silhouettes. It wasn't until after 2 rounds of fire that the British realized their mistake and tried to adjust their aim. But it was too late. The Bismarck, already firing its 5th salvo, struck the Hood, sending a shell through its thin armor and into the ammunition storage, causing a massive explosion that split the ship in 2. Within minutes, the Hood sank, killing 1,418 British sailors, with only 3 survivors. Meanwhile, the British Prince of Wales, heavily damaged, was forced to retreat. The Bismarck's first combat resulted in the destruction of two of Britain's most formidable warships, delivering a significant blow. The sinking of the Hood was a major shock to Britain, as the ship had been considered the pride of the Royal Navy. Winston Churchill was furious and ordered the destruction of the Bismarck at all costs. In response, the British Navy gathered nearly all available ships, deploying 42 warships, including 2 aircraft carriers, 3 battlecruisers, and 5 battleships. The goal was singular: the Bismarck. Such a large-scale naval manhunt was unprecedented in naval warfare history. Although the Bismarck had emerged victorious in its initial battle, it suffered significant damage in the process. This led to problems with its fuel supply system, and the ship had to return to port for repairs. With its speed reduced, on May 26, the Royal Navy's aircraft carrier Ark Royal spotted the Bismarck and launched 15 torpedo bombers, which relentlessly attacked the battleship. One torpedo struck the Bismarck's rudder, rendering it unable to maneuver, making it an easy target for the British fleet. On May 27, the British pursuit fleet, led by the battleship King George V and the battlecruiser Rodney, caught up with the Bismarck and unleashed a barrage of fire. After hours of intense bombardment, the Bismarck took over 400 shell hits and numerous torpedo strikes. Ultimately, the ship sank into the Atlantic Ocean. This marked the end of the Bismarck's legendary yet short-lived combat career, as well as the twilight of the era of large battleships, giving way to the rise of aircraft carriers. As the symbol of the German Navy during World War II, the Bismarck, with its imposing appearance, powerful firepower, and legendary battle record, continues to capture the public's imagination. The sinking of the Bismarck represented a major setback for Germany's surface fleet. As the most powerful warship in the German Navy at the time, the loss of the Bismarck had far-reaching strategic consequences. From that point forward, Germany could no longer directly challenge the British Navy in open battle. Instead, it shifted its focus and resources to the more cost-effective and efficient U-boat operations, leading to a decrease in surface fleet activities. The loss of the Bismarck marked a critical turning point in the Battle of the Atlantic. While German U-boats continued to pose a threat to Allied shipping throughout the war, the German Navy had lost the initiative and could no longer cut off Britain's supply lines, forcing Britain to surrender. After the failure in the Battle of Britain and the loss of the Bismarck, Germany's attempts to gain dominance in both the air and at sea ended in defeat, and its maritime plans were effectively thwarted. With the prospect of a German invasion of Britain fading, Hitler refocused his strategy on continental Europe, specifically targeting the Soviet Union. He believed that a victory over the Soviet Union would be the final blow to British resistance, causing Britain to seek peace with Germany. Confident in the strength of the German army, which had seen no defeats since the start of the war, Hitler decided to launch Operation Barbarossa in the summer of 1941, hoping to replicate the success of the French campaign. Germany was now about to embark on its next campaign, the invasion of the Soviet Union.